But without government intervention, without government interference, the Depression worked out itself. The one in the early 1920s, that is. Your book hardly mentions it. But anyway, your book goes from then talking about French, talk about one nation after another, the French, the hopeful years, particularly in the case of France, they were concerned because we share a long border with Germany, and what if there's another war? Well, the other countries promised, well, if there's another war, we'll come to your aid. They didn't. At least the United States didn't. From 1924 to 1929, the world experienced a little bit of prosperity, and we call these the hopeful years. Now, several things went on during this period. The London Times declared, we are going to have peace at last. Now, I'm trying to see, I don't even see the Kellogg-Briand Pact. All right, I'm going to tell something to you folk who are here. This will be on the test. Make that back. The Kellogg-Briand Pact simply outlawed war. Just, do you remember that much about it? Two men got together and organized, and the nations of the world signed, including the United States, and they promised we'll never go to war again. Problem was, there was no way to enforce it. Well, what if two nations did go to war? Well, we'll just beg them not to. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, there was a lot of pacifism that went on at this time. And among the biggest pacifists was Albert Einstein, who wrote a few books, one of them entitled Why War? The Jews especially were teaching their people pacifism, and it was the hope was, folk, that there'd not be another war. Now, my wife is descended from Jews, and I in no way need to be anti-Semitic. But I've heard from persons who know that the Jewish rabbis no longer teach pacifism to their congregations. Here's why. At least 6 million Jews living in Eastern Europe were thrown into ovens or gassed to death, or lined up in front of a firing squad and shot to death. The reason I have such strong feelings about it, folks, is I have a brother who's a pacifist. I wound up joining the army. Hey, I wish pacifism would work. What does pacifism do? It encourages the bad guy to go to war with you. Now, if any of you want to make a comment, your comments will be welcome. I won't argue. But I'm going to make a point. If you don't stand up and fight for yourself, people will take you up alive and toss you in the burning ovens. This is what people will do to you if you don't stand up and fight. All right, anybody have any comments? It seems like I got most of you awake and listening at least. I mean, if you don't like what I'm saying, hell, I don't like it either. It's just, to me, it's a fact of life. Like I say, Jewish rabbis don't teach pacifism these days. And Jewish soldiers are among the best in the world. Just ask anybody who is opposed to them. Most of their enemies take off running pell-mell full speed from the battlefields. I mean, running really hard and fast, leaving their weapons behind. All right. No one wants to comment, at least you all appear to be listening. But anyway, there was a big pacifist movement between the wars. And guess what? Adolf Hitler took over. And the rest we'll talk about in the chapters ahead. All right. The prosperity ended abruptly in 1929 in a period called the Great Depression. We don't know all the cause of depression, but here's one thing we're pretty certain caused depression. Your factories, and this was true all over the Western world, they kept producing and producing. And when they made a profit, they should have used their money from the profits to pay their workers or to pay their shareholders big dividends. Instead, they took their money and used to build bigger factories to produce more at the expense of their workers who were not getting paid enough. What this meant was eventually the factories produced more than they could sell. And when that happened, of course, that meant they had to lay off a bunch of workers. But again, if the workers would have had the buying power, if the factories would have produced less and paid their workers more, there might not have been any depression. Also, the farmer did not do well, and here's part of the reason. About this time, farmers found they could afford to buy tractors on credit, and they began to buy tractors and reapers and combines and all this farm machinery and oh yeah, new fertilizer developed. Hey, it sounds great. Better fertilizers, better control of diseases. All this machinery, they planted and put their produce on the market. And guess what? Their neighbor farmers have been planting too, but the price went down and down and down and down. One person advised a farmer, said, you farmers ought to raise less corn, less wheat, and simply not put out as much. But the farmers kept on putting out more and more and more, which made them poorer and poorer and poorer as the price went down and down and down. So the overproduction did a lot, overproduction of agricultural goods. Now, something else I want to tell about the stock market. If you see a stock, any of you, this might be benefited sometime. If a stock keeps going, what should you do? No? If a stock is giving it this, going up and up and up and keeps going up, get out. Get out. The time, believe it or not, the time to get in when the market's going down. Now, on Friday last week we had a big drop in the market. That was the time to at least think about getting in. Last week had a 2% drop, in fact, in the market. Today, market's up. I don't know how long I never know how long that'll last, but but when the market keeps going up, what these people did, they thought, aha, the market's always going to go up. So they kept, and then they started borrowing money to buy stock. And they were investing money they could not afford to lose. And when the market crashed, the crash was inevitable, many of them found tall buildings and jumped off. This you can read about from other sources. Some of you may have heard it. Because they said to themselves, well, never. All right, it's happened overnight, but basically here's the one thing that caused it. Men like Joseph Kennedy, the father of President Kennedy, got together. Now, hopefully this couldn't happen today, but then again, it might. These rich people got together who owned much of the market, and they said, let's all go to a broker. They agreed, let's go to a broker on October 29th, 1929, and let's all sell our stock to bring the price down. And then we'll go back on October 30th and buy this stock back reduced. It's called shorting the market. So they went on October 20th and sold their stock. They didn't realize how bad it was going to get. It went down and down and down and kept on going down and down and down. They had what you call a crash. We had somewhat a repeat of that in 2008. But that crash in 2008 was not as bad as the one in 1929. But the market, they had a big crash. Again, there have been all kinds of books written on the Depression. As for Germany, when the American market crashed, the American investors who'd invested in Germany began pulling their money out of the German market also. And of course, when all the investors pulled out, that sent the German market down also. And essentially, all the factory workers, or at least most of them, found themselves out of work with no chance to get work. And you had something you had not had before in the history of mankind, a whole bunch of able-bodied men who were able to work, willing to work, wanting to work, who were told there's no work for you. Go back home. Some of them loaded their families up in their cars and their house was foreclosed and they just began to wander around like gypsies trying to find some place to live and something to do, some place where there might be a job. Some of the men abandoned their families, felt like, I can't provide my family, I'm not worthy of my family. They just became the hobos in the 1930s. The men, oftentimes, the men who had work, would work and get their paycheck on Friday, and they'd look at their meager paycheck and think of the size of their obligations. And their obligations were bigger than their paycheck, and folk, if this hasn't happened to you yet, it will. So they would cope by stopping at the local liquor store on the way home and drinking down all their troubles and then face their family flat broke. This was often the way they coped. Again, that is no way to cope. But anyway, the market had collapsed. And a lot of people then began to embrace Karl Marx at this point, because Marx had predicted it would happen. Communism took on a new popularity. Democracy appeared to have triumphed at the end of World War I. Well, all of a sudden the triumph was over. Dictatorships began to take over. Now, Germany. In the case of Germany, your book doesn't mention Hitler yet, so I won't. Essentially, the Germans tried a Republican form of government. It failed. They elected a president, one of their heroes, named Hindenburg. And under him, the Depression got worse and worse. German money began to have less and less and less value until it became utterly worthless. And I've read stories about Germans who would find that the stores would not accept their paper money. The German mark was worthless. Eventually, though, they started trading shares of stock, and that was something that the store owners would take. And eventually, they were able to get some type of currency circulating again. But now, I'm going to jump ahead in the story of Germany a little bit. A man named Adolf Hitler, who had not done well during the prosperous times. I mean, Hitler was a bad man, and he could not operate in good times. When the Depression hit, he stood up and he said, I know how I can put all you people back to work and put food on your table again. And a lot of the Germans believed him. That's a subject for a later chapter. The United States. When the Depression occurred, Herbert Hoover was president, and he got blamed for the Depression. And President Roosevelt used the Depression as an excuse to get himself elected in the next election. Herbert Hoover had just taken office about 7 or 8 months before the crash. Actually more like 7 months before the crash. Oh yeah, I gotta tell you, Herbert Hoover's inaugural address. He got up and he said, there will be 2 cars in every garage. The Americans will have 2 chickens in every pot. We're going to see a time when poverty will be wiped out off the face of the American scene. The poorhouse is vanishing from the American landscape. We are going to be rich from now on. Within 7 years, the bottom dropped out. His speech came back to haunt him. You've got to be careful what you say, folks.